Hello everyone. At the moment, I am in Mexico. So I thought that as November the 2nd is the famous Mexican celebration of the Day of the Dead, I would do a story from this wonderful country. I asked a few people what story I should do, and many were suggested, but the name Juan Soldado kept on being mentioned. So this is the story I'm going to do. This was a completely new case for me. I'd never previously heard of it. So sit back as we go to 1930s Tijuana. Not much is known in the early years of the life of Juan Soldado. In fact, there are many conflicting reports about where he comes from. What is known is that he was born Juan Castillo Morales, but where is a matter of debate. Many references suggest he was born in 1918 in the northern state of Jalisco, but a couple of others, and the ones I tend to favour, think that he was from the town of Ixtlaltepec in the state of Oaxaca, and was born 4 years earlier in 1914. His origins are not the most important thing in this story. It's what happened when the young man grew up and became a private in the Mexican army. In 1938, he was serving at a military barracks in Tijuana. 1938, Tijuana was a very different place to the city we all know today. 80 years ago, it was a small border town with about 20,000 inhabitants. The late 30s were hard times in the northern town. Prohibition had ended in the USA 5 years earlier, meaning American citizens no longer needed to cross the border to find alcohol. And in 1935, when the president banned gambling in Mexico, Tijuana's Agua Caliente Casino and hotel saw far less customers and eventually shut down. This all meant poorer economic conditions for the town's people. On February 13th, 1938, a young 8-year-old girl named Olga Camacho disappeared. A large search followed trying to find her, and eventually her body was discovered near the military barracks, which was close to where she lived. She had had her throat cut and had been sexually molested. This quite rightly caused a public outcry. The public thought they had a paedophile on the loose and demanded justice. The authorities realised this case needed to be resolved quickly to ease the town people's anger and to quell the lynch mob that had gathered in the town square. Olga's father had been involved in a labour dispute arising from the closing of the local casino where he had worked. Tensions were already running high in the town even before the murder. A suspect, or some say a scapegoat, was soon identified and taken into custody, and that was Army Private Juan Castillo Morales. A crowd led by the girl's parents and others connected with the labour dispute attempted to seize him while he was in custody, setting fire to the police station and the city hall and preventing firefighters from responding to the fires. After Juan was arrested, he allegedly confessed, but other accounts claim he maintained his innocence. Many accounts say that after little Olga's body was found, the general ordered Juan to collect it for burial. When he returned, he was immediately arrested. A military tribunal was formed and tried Juan in a single night, not stopping to check his fingerprints against the crime scene or any evidence. He was found guilty and condemned to death by ley de fuga, a cruel ritual that compelled him to run towards the border while being targeted by the firing squad. The authorities had the murderer, the public were calmer, and the mini uprising stopped. thousands of onlookers turned out for what would be a public execution, Juan started running, but before he could reach US soil, he was fatally shot in the back. This is where the story gets interesting. Sympathizers went to collect Juan's body and tried to clean his blood from the ground, but it could not be removed. People started saying this was a miracle and proved that he was innocent. He was taken and buried in the same cemetery as Olga. Soon after, mysterious reports began circulating that his grave was oozing blood and that his soul was floating around, proclaiming his innocence. Maybe there were people who already believed that, but had dared not speak up before, when the lynch mob were demanding justice. Maybe the rushed, not altogether, judicial investigation and the cruelty of the execution led some people to feel guilty after the event. Before the end of 1938, newspapers reported about people praying at the grave of Juan, and after praying beside his grave, their prayers had been answered. He was no longer Juan Castillo Morales, the executed army private. He was now known as Juan Soldado, which means Soldier Juan. 2 chapels were erected, dedicated to Juan Soldado. The first one on the edge of the cemetery where he died. The second chapel is for all to enter and is where he is buried. For decades after his death, Juan Soldado was relatively unknown, particularly outside Tijuana, but as illegal migration from Latin America to the US increased in the late 20th century, the Tijuana border became one of the most protected in the world. Since then, thousands of northbound migrants have arrived in Tijuana each year. Many of them visit the shrine before making the illegal crossing from northern Mexico into the USA. He has now developed into a cult figure in Tijuana and throughout the border region. Many call him a saint, and he is considered the unofficial saint of migrants and polleros. Polleros being the gangs involved in trafficking migrants. Some have claimed that he has helped them in other areas, such as health and family problems. There is a chapel built over his resting place, which is always full of offerings. If Juan was not the killer, the question still remains: who was? It has been suggested that a more senior ranking officer was actually the guilty party, but as records are so vague from this period, we will never be sure. Some people say that Juan was the murderer and the right person was executed. They say that after the brutal execution, a feeling of collective guilt swamped Tijuana. This, coupled with superstition, combined to produce a cult, which spread by word of mouth throughout the border region. Newcomers to Tijuana would visit the cemetery and believe the story, with no historical understanding of the facts behind the case. For the surviving members of the Camacho family, the fact that Juan Castillo Morales, Juan Soldado, is revered as a popular unofficial saint is an outrage. Several years ago, they demanded that Olga's body be exhumed and reburied in another cemetery, rather than remain in the same graveyard as her murderer. Whether Juan was innocent or guilty, his shrine will be full on November the 2nd with offerings. People will queue to visit it. Mariachi bands will perform outside it, and the story of Juan Soldado will live on. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening to this tragic, sad, and, in my opinion, quite bizarre case. As usual, your comments and your feedback are always very much appreciated. If any of you has a case that you'd like me to do on this channel, please leave it in the comment section or you can email me. And I will see you all in the next brief case.